Today I'm going to do a video that's both a review and an update on the appearances of Christ during the end times. Now, the way I was taught originally about when Christ would appear during the end times was a little bit sketchy, but chances are you were taught this as well, that Christ would come in the clouds. He wouldn't actually step down on the earth, and people would be raptured, the dead would be raised. He would bring the spirits of dead believers with him, who would then go into their immortal bodies from the dust of the ground, be caught up to the clouds, and then believers who are still alive would be caught up to the clouds, and then everybody would somehow or another get changed and be taken into heaven. That's the first appearance / non-appearance of Christ on the earth during the end times. And the second one would be when Jesus steps down on the Mount of Olives at the very end, basically probably on the Day of Atonement at his second coming. That's what I thought up until I did my own research on all of this stuff. And then I realized that if you understand the book of Revelation and these glorious angels, mighty angels, angel from the rising sun, one like a son of man seated on a cloud, all of these unusual angels that we see in Revelation are not really angels in the sense that they're created beings that we think of that have wings and so on. No, these are Jesus as God's messenger. And remember, Jesus is the primary and most important messenger that God ever sent. God sent his son to be the message and to deliver the message. And the word angel is not a reference to a certain kind of created being. It is a role description. If you are a messenger, whether you're one of these spirit beings or whether you're Christ or whether you're just a regular person, the word angel or angelos or malach is used to describe this role of delivering a message. So there are these interesting angels who show up, and I'll link to a video that I've done on this. Actually, I've done a number of them, but not recently, so that's why I'm doing this. And then somebody also asked, could I put updated dates going with the various times that we see Christ appearing during the end times? As a general rule, whether you're pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, or whatever, most people tend to only believe that there is one rapture of the church or one rapture of the bride, whether it's pre, mid, post, or whatever. But in actuality, the book of Revelation doesn't describe the rapture of a bride or the rapture of the church. What it describes are how various groups of sons end up in the heavenly temple, okay? Because the sons are priests after the order of Melchizedek, both kings and priests that end up in the heavenly temple. Talked about all of that before. But when you have a certain framework or certain filter that you're trying to push everything through with regard to the end times, you end up with an inaccurate or skewed or convoluted perspective. And in the process of my own personal studies, everything has gotten bigger and more clear as far as who is this person in Revelation that shows up? And that people just go, oh, that's just an angel. Well, it is not just an angel. This is Jesus, and he's coming to earth, and he's doing things. And that's what we're going to look at today. So before we go on, I just want you to know that I do have a PDF that you can download with all the current feast days. So if our rapture is this fall in 2024, these are what I believe are the applicable feasts and the feast days. And here's a timeline at the top that shows you these various appearances for the current timeline, which would start in 2024 with the second coming of Christ in 2028. Okay, so we don't have 7 years. The Jews only have 3.5 years left. Christ already fulfilled the first 3.5 years of that 70th week of Daniel. And he will fulfill as well the last 3.5 years. And I've done videos on that as well about Christ and the Antichrist, both showing up at the same time at the abomination of desolation. But let's take a look at the timeline. We'll start at the very beginning with the war in Israel. And we can see that there is labor pains that are gearing up to a major, major war in Israel, one that she may not survive. And I believe that this final birth pang, which results in the delivery of the male child, will most likely be the Gog-Magog war, Ezekiel 38. We see the alliances that are coming together right now between Russia and Iran and Turkey, and God begins this and God will end it. So the Gog-Magog war, I believe, is what is going to start this whole thing at the time of the end. And by the way, on the PDF, I also have verses listed, reference passages for what I'm saying. So I'm not just talking off the top of my head, making up things. I actually have a scriptural reason for why I am saying these things. So when the end times begin, this is not going to be started by anyone other than the Lord. Okay, and it's God who is going to put the hook in the jaw for Gog, of Magog, and this alliance, this person, Gog, is actually the protector. He's the guard of those who are underneath him, and there are other nations who will ally themselves with Gog, and what we could end up with is all those wars, Psalm 83 and different wars that are end time wars are probably all describing the same conflict, okay, different aspects of the same conflict. But God is the one who starts it all, and he's the one who ends it all. So Ezekiel 38 will begin this final labor pain for Israel when she is all alone. She has totally isolated herself. She's at the end. There is no place to go, nowhere to go unless God delivers her. And then in Ezekiel 39, if you read that chapter, what you'll see is basically a description of Armageddon, and that is going to be at the end when Christ returns. So God begins the war, God ends the war in the person of Christ, and that's the beginning and the end. Okay, and by the time you get to the end of the war in Ezekiel 39, what you have is the world knowing that God is the Lord. All right, so we have the war beginning potentially on the Feast of Trumpets, around the Feast of Trumpets, October 2nd of 2024. The place where we actually first see an appearance of Christ, letter B right here, and this is when Christ comes joined by the two witnesses and sets up this tabernacle that is a reflection of the temple that we see in Revelation. So this is when the tabernacle or the temple is erected. And you may ask me, so why do I think that Jesus will be there when that tabernacle is set up? Well, that tabernacle or this structure, this temple, has to be connected with Christ. And there's some very interesting passages, prophetic passages, that talk about Jesus and the two witnesses, which I believe are Moses and Elijah, who appeared with him on the Mount of Transfiguration, which Peter said was a prophecy about the end times. So in Matthew 17, verses 1 through 9, we have the story of the Transfiguration, where Jesus tells the apostles, do not tell anyone the vision. It really happened. They really saw Christ. God really came down and said, this is my beloved son. The two witnesses, Moses and Elijah, were really there. So it wasn't like it was part of their imagination. But this was something that was prophetic. And in fact, just before the Transfiguration happened, Jesus said that there are some standing here who will not die until they've seen the kingdom of God come. So that isn't a reference to the kingdom of God coming in 70 AD. This is a reference to the Transfiguration, where Jesus was in end time glory. Okay, so 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 19 Peter makes a reference back to the transfiguration, and he calls it a prophetic word. We have the prophetic word made more sure. So we know that whatever happened with the transfiguration was a prophecy. Zechariah chapter 4 talks about the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, and we read in Revelation 11, John is told to measure the temple of God. It's God's temple. It's in the holy city, and we read about this in connection with the 2 witnesses, who are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that we read about in Zechariah 4, who are the people, and particularly Zerubbabel, who was instrumental in laying the foundation for and then seeing the completion of that second temple. So we have a lot of temple imagery here. We have second coming imagery. And the other thing we have is Day of Atonement imagery, because what Peter said was, let's stay here on the mountain and let's set up some tabernacles for you and Moses and Elijah. And the Day of Atonement is just 5 days before the Feast of Tabernacles. So we have this Day of Atonement connection with a temple, with the 2 witnesses, Mount of Transfiguration, and so on. And that's why I believe that Christ is going to appear with the 2 witnesses, and on the Day of Atonement, October 12th, and all these dates are plus or minus 24 hours, and this is when the tabernacle will be erected. Now you have to understand that what's happening here is there's a war going on. Okay, there's a war in Israel. All this is going to be done underneath bombs flying overhead and the destruction of much of Israel. Much of Israel is going to have already been, annihilated. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be very distressing. And it's in this place where Israel is at her end that all of a sudden you've got Jesus and 2 witnesses, 2 people appearing on Mount Zion, which is where the temple is going to be located. It's not going to be on Mount Moriah. It's on Mount Zion. And what we have is actually, it's a tent after the tabernacle of David, which is fallen and going to be rebuilt. So this is all going to be done under some very dire and stressful circumstances, and that is how this will take place. Christ will be there, and that temple will be set up. The next thing that's going to happen after Christ appears, there's a period of time, a period of a few days, and by the way, during this whole end time period, Christ is going to be coming and going between earth and heaven, and he's very active and he's doing all kinds of things. Now, a lot of people would have you think that there's a rapture going to take place. Believers are all going to go to heaven. There's a 7-year marriage supper of the Lamb. But the funny thing is, in the one book that says it describes the prophetic testimony of Jesus that God gave him to show us what's going to happen, there isn't anything about 7 years of a wedding. There's nothing about that. There is nothing about that. There is a wedding that will take place in the new heavens and the new earth when the new Jerusalem comes down. But before that, there is no wedding. And one of the reasons why is because according to the Old Testament law, if you're a groom and you've taken a bride, you don't receive any commissions and you don't go to war. And clearly what is going to be happening here is a lot of warfare, and Christ has a commission. He's going to take the scroll from his Father, which is the commission to carry out the end time plan. So the next thing that's going to happen is Christ, as the mighty angel of Revelation chapter 10, is going to descend to the earth, 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the sea. And what does he do? Well, he roars like a lion. Okay, Amos tells us that. Does a lion roar unless he's taken prey? No, he doesn't. So what is the prey that this lion is taking, that Christ is taking? He is taking people who belong to him. He puts 1 foot on the land of the living, 1 foot on the sea of death. And all of those who belong to him are going to be either resurrected, and their resurrection will actually take place in heaven, because that's where their spirits are. And according to Paul, that's where their new bodies are being kept as well. And if we're here on earth, we will be changed. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 tells us too that Christ will descend with a cry and the shout of an archangel. He doesn't come in the clouds. He actually descends all the way to earth at the time that we're going to be raptured. The mighty angel descends, and then remember, we have 7 days. The male child is going to be here, born, we're transformed, we're changed. And then we don't actually go to heaven. We're not presented to God until the 8th day. Okay, and that would be on October 24th of 2024. There is a 7-day waiting period before priests begin to serve on the 8th day, 7 days before the child is given to God and redeemed on the 8th day. There's 7 days for a leper before he can go into the temple on the 8th day. There's all these 7 with an 8th day periods of time that apply to all firstborn sons, whether you're one of the 24 elders, the 144,000 of Israel, or whether you're another group of firstborn sons who are going to inherit along with Christ, all have 7 days with an 8th day. Okay, so the 8th day here would be October 24th. That's when believers are going to be raptured. Okay, this is the first rapture. So after the mighty angel changes us, then begins the process of passing the baton to the next group, the 144,000 of Israel. And that's going to happen over this same 7-day period. This is the period where we're going to have the passing of the baton of ministry from us to the 144,000 of Israel. This is when the 144,000 are sealed. And in Revelation 7, it's the angel from the east who has the seal of the living God. This is the angel that rises from the east who has the seal of the living God, who seals the 144,000 along with others. Okay, it's telling the 4 trumpet angels, don't do anything until we have sealed the 144,000, the servants of our God, on their forehead, the 144,000 of Israel. Okay, so we have Christ appearing when the temple is erected on the Day of Atonement. We have him as the mighty angel who descends from heaven and raises the dead and changes the living. We have him as the angel from the east. The 144,000 are sealed. Okay, the next thing, letter E here, is this is when the Lamb appears on Mount Zion. This is when the 144,000 follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They're on Mount Zion, okay? And you have to remember, the tabernacle is connected to Mount Zion. The 144,000 who are counted, numbered, are connected to Mount Zion, and Mount Zion also is where they'll be gathered together when the time comes for their rapture. So this is going to happen basically on Palm Sunday. This is when they're going to be changed, and then again they've got their 7 days, and then they'll be taken into heaven, and that's where we see them brought to heaven by the Lamb, and that's Jesus. Revelation 14:2 and 3, and Revelation 3:10. And remember, we're talking about groups of sons going into the heavenly temple, groups of sons who are going to be serving God in the heavenly temple. We're not talking about a bride or the church being raptured. That's not what Revelation is a story about. Okay, I've done videos on that as well. All right, so the next time we see Christ is when he's the glorious angel who declares that Babylon has fallen. And this right here is when we have the abomination of desolation. It's the sixth trumpet. And then this is when Christ appears as the glorious angel who declares that Babylon is fallen. Okay, fallen is Babylon. And this is when Christ leads the remnant into the wilderness. And I've done so many videos on Christ doing this, and I have different passages here: Revelation 18, 1 through 4, Zechariah 14, 4 through 6. This is actually when Christ comes down to the Mount of Olives, and there is a great earthquake, and the remnant flees through the earthquake. Matthew 24, 15 through 28. There's all kinds of passages that talk about Christ leading the remnant into the wilderness. Otherwise, if he doesn't do that, if he doesn't guide them into the wilderness like he did basically during the time of the Exodus, they are not going to be kept. They will not know where to go. So this is what's going to happen here at the sixth trumpet, the day of the abomination of desolation, which is April 19th of 2025. So now we have the remnant in the wilderness. And when is the next time that Christ is going to appear? Well, that's right here. And we do not know when that is, because that is when that third rapture takes place. That is when Christ appears like a son of man, and he's seated on a cloud. Okay, this is the cloud rapture that Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. You'll notice that there are people, the dead have already been raised over here. Okay, there's dead raised right here when the mighty angel descends and with the cry, 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the sea of death. Okay, that's a resurrection that's already happened. Then those who are alive until the coming of the Lord will be brought into heaven right here. Okay, we don't know that date. We don't know when that rapture is, but we do know that it will be after the abomination of desolation and before the visible return of Christ. So this actually begins the day of the Lord and the wrath of God, and basically the seven bowls will happen in here. And this is when Christ returns. He returns as the warrior king, many diadems on his head. He's on a white horse, and he comes and puts an end to what's going on earth at Armageddon. Okay, and that actually is on a known date. It's the Day of Atonement in some year, hopefully 2028. And this day right here is going to be exactly 1,260 days or 42 months up to right here. We know exactly how long it is between the abomination and when Christ returns. What we don't know is when the day of the Lord will begin. It begins on a day we don't know, but we know the window of time. It's after the abomination and before his second coming. And that's a Day of Atonement, second coming. And then finally, 5 days later is the Feast of Tabernacles. And this is when we finally see the seventh trumpet, and the rest of the dead are raised. It's another resurrection of those who've been beheaded and other people as well. It's a time of reward for some people. And this is the end of the wrath of God is over. And this is the time, I believe, when the beast and the false prophet are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. That's part of the whole triumph thing of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a huge celebration. And also we know that this Feast of Tabernacles, is going to be celebrated all through the millennium. It commemorates the time when Christ set up his kingdom on the earth and began to reign. Sort of like in America, it's sort of like our 4th of July, only it lasts 8 days. So these are appearances of Christ during the end times. This is a timeline I have, and again, I have a PDF that you can get that has the dates, and it has the passages, the verses that I've used to arrive at this. And there are also many, many videos on my channel where I talk about these things. I suggest that you order one of these thumb drives that has my videos, the timeline, show notes, and so on. All of this stuff is on this one tiny little drive. Also, that you just download and copy off the timelines. There's a one-page timeline. I have videos. We have Bible studies, all kinds of things. We're on Discord. You can come fellowship over there at Discord. People have come alongside me and have been helping me to share the things that I've, come to understand. Is this 100% correct? Well, it's the best to my ability. This is the best that I've gotten so far. And I'm really believing that this year is going to be the year of our rapture. I don't see how already, just looking at how things are going so far this summer, I don't even know how Israel can hold out till the fall. But according to prophecy, that has to happen because of how all of the rest of the elements of the timeline have to fit in. We know that there are certain day counts, 5 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 days of, that the two witnesses are in the streets. There's all these time elements that have to mesh, and they also need to mesh with various feasts of the Lord and not violate other prophetic passages. So I've done the best that I could, and I hope that you're blessed. If you want to add something to what I've done here, you can do that in the comments section. And till the next video, I pray you have a very, very blessed day.